Good morning. Thanks for having me this morning.
So House and Senate leaders have agreed to temporarily extend government funding in two batches through March 1st and March 8th. That's according to sources. Are you in favor of that? Do you support that?
Yes, and thank you for having me this morning to talk about some of these things that are very important. As you know, the first deadline we're facing is this Friday, and we have to come up with some alternatives in order to get our work done, particularly the appropriations bills, which we just barely recently got the top line numbers, so we haven't had the adequate time necessary to come up with the final versions of the spending bills and then conference those between the House and the Senate. And so the bottom line is, to be pragmatic about this, we have to have extra time allotted in order to get these bills done, or else we are faced either with a government shutdown or with a continuing resolution for the rest of the year. Both options are not something that most people are looking forward to.
Well, speaking of the top line numbers, we're looking at 886 billion for the U.S. military, about 773 billion for everything else. What's your view on that, and as far as priorities go?
So we've been working through this whole process as Republicans as we address the appropriations packages for the upcoming, or for the current fiscal year, actually 2024. And our main objective through this whole process has been to bend the spending curve that we have been on for a long time in this country. We have to get control over our spending. We are faced with a $34 trillion debt, as you know, and we have to get our fiscal house in order, as that kind of out of control spending and debt is not sustainable for the future of our country. So that's the bottom line, the goals of how we've been addressing the spending packages. And so I think that even though this is longer than we would have preferred to get this done, I think it's critically important that we get that we do it right, that we get our numbers correct. And so having a little extra time, having time to work through our differences within our conference, as well as between the House and the Senate, the Democrats and Republicans, I think that's a good thing. Those numbers reflect the necessary give and take between the two chambers and between the two parties. And in order for us to advance forward, that's the reality of where we are.
And the Freedom Caucus also wants to bring down spending. What's your view of their approach, and do you think that it's been useful and constructive?
So I have the same goal. I think that our fiscal responsibility needs are critical, and we have to address them as soon as we possibly can. And the American people want us to do that. We have to change the habit of the federal government and continuing to spend more and more every single year. If we just as an example, if we pass the bills as the Republicans wrote them this year in the House of Representatives, we would be, for the first time in a long time, if maybe ever, spend less in the upcoming fiscal year than we did in the last fiscal year. That's never happened. And that is exactly the kind of fiscal restraint we need to exercise. Now, the Freedom Caucus, many of those people are friends of mine, and I agree with their goals. But I do think that shutting down the government, using that as leverage to achieve the goals that we all need, what my experience has been, and I've been in Congress now in my fifth term, I have never seen a government shutdown accomplish the stated goals that we all want to have happen. And it ends up costing the government more money as people are furloughed. They continue to accrue pay, so we end up having to pay them. So many things are put on hold that cost the American people money, and you never ever achieve the goals that you had in mind. So there's no upside to a government shutdown. So I think that we should not be looking at that as a strategy. It's unproductive, and then politically, it seems, at least in my short experience, Republicans always take the blame politically.
And Congressman, what's your view on U.S. aid to Israel and Ukraine? And do you think it should be tied to an agreement on the southern border?
So, three very important issues there, Mimi. And let me just tell you that the crisis that we are experiencing at our international borders, the southern and northern borders, is of epic proportion. And I believe that we need to use every leverage available to us in order to strengthen the security that we need to display on our borders. And so, tying those issues together, I think makes logical sense. It's something that we on our side of the aisle think is very important. I also agree that we need to stand behind our allies, both Ukraine and Israel. But these are very important issues for all of us in Congress and for the American people. I think we can find between Republicans and Democrats common ground here so that we can move forward. But I do believe that the existential crisis that we face at our border is paramount. And people around the country tell me every day that we have to get control of our borders. So it's very difficult to agree to spending to prop up and to help and to aid our allies if we don't even take care of our issues here at home. I think we can marry the two together and then move forward successfully on all fronts.
And what specifically do you think needs to be done at the border, specifically the southern border? Is it simply HR2, or is there anything more that you are proposing?
So we had as you know, during the last administration, the border wasn't perfect, granted, but it was in much better shape than it is today. And I think largely we can point to many of the decisions that were made by the Biden administration to reverse some of the policies that were working on the southern border. I think we need to stop, catch, and release. We have to reinstitute remain in Mexico. I think we need to continue working and building the security along the border itself. I've been to the border several times, plan on going again very soon. It disturbs me greatly to see individuals crossing freely into our country with no obstacles in their way. We have the raw materials sitting right at the border, ready to be installed, and I think we should continue building that wall. So there's lots of things besides some of the policy measures that are included in HR2 are very important. And the interesting thing about this, recognizing, and I don't think you'll find a Democrat or a Republican that will tell you we don't have a very serious situation at our southern border. The president right now could make executive decisions that could reverse what's happening at that border. He could do that without Congress's actions. But that has not happened yet. We're talking with the president to explain and enlighten him as to some of the things that he could do to stop this and turn around what we're seeing. We're getting 300,000 illegal entries a month. That's in the last 3 years, we have gotten about the equivalent of my home state of Washington crossing into the United States illegally. And that is not sustainable. People on both sides of the aisle agree that we cannot continue doing that.
And Congressman, I want to ask you about the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. Can you explain what that is and what it would do?
Absolutely. And thank you for asking about that. This is something that I've been working on my entire tenure here in Congress. I'm a farmer in the state of Washington. We have very labor intensive crops in my state, as do many other states. And we need to have a reliable workforce, but we also want a legal workforce. And the Farm Workforce Modernization Act is I think, a very good solution to achieve that. It allows people to come into the country legally, and then when the work is done, at the end of the year, they can return to their home countries legally as well, without the fear of not being able to return for the next growing season. So I think it's actually part of the solution that we need to control our borders. It removes the incentive for people to cross into our country illegally because they now have a vehicle, a method that they can come into our country to work on our nation's farms. We need them, and then they can return home, like I said, when the work is done.
All right, and you have just finally, you have you endorsed a candidate for the GOP nomination? I just want to note that you were one of the 10 Republicans that voted to impeach former President Trump after the January 6th attack?
I have not. I think it's still very early in our process, and I'm waiting to see how things play out and how the American people determine who the nominee should be. I can tell you that I do not want to see another 4 years of what we've seen in the Biden administration. I think it's critically important that Republicans return to the White House, but I have not made a decision yet on who I will be supporting.
And I mean, would you support Donald Trump if he was the Republican nominee?
I think it's very early for me to make that determination. Like I said, I'm waiting to hear from the American people and who our options are going to be. But just to underscore, we cannot afford another 4 years of Joe Biden, in my humble opinion.
All right, Congressman Dan Newhouse, Republican of Washington, member of the Appropriations Committee and the Select Committee on U.S.-China Competition. Thanks so much for joining us today.